what is the best approach to addressing the problem we have with the river walls on the east branch of the Rahway River between Jefferson and Oakland. It is important for all of us, and I think we all share the same goal, and that is to have a free-flowing river there. We want to make sure that the water gets out of there as quickly as possible because it comes from upstream, and you know better than anyone how quickly it comes. And it also is the depository of all of the runoff we have locally. Not all, but the area around here. So we need to make sure that our drainage pipes have a place to drain into, and that the river is working well. And so we are going to be discussing what we think we can do to help that along, doing some work around the dam. But the main issue tonight is the river walls. And I'm going to introduce our team here, but did want to mention that we have Mayor Adams is on the Zoom to join us. And
hi, everybody.
If she wanted to jump in, she can jump in at any time. So again, the goal as we approach this is to have a free-flowing river and to make sure that the walls are stable, make sure that the walls don't end up in the river and impede that flow. As you know, and as we said in our letter, based on information that we have looking at deeds and surveys and what have you, the river walls are individually owned by each property owner. And the river itself is a river, what's called River of the State, or a waterway of the state. So it's a state waterway. It is actually part of the Rahway River drainage basin. This is the East Branch. There's a West Branch that's up in the reservation. They merge in the Springfield, Milburn area, and then end up going down through Cranford and out into the Rahway. So there's flooding up and down. We've been talking to the the Army Corps of Engineers about that for a while. And so it's a major, major problem. But again, tonight we're talking about this little sliver here that we have and trying to work with you as your property owners to see what we can do moving forward. So with that, I'll be here for questions, and I'm going to introduce our team that's been working on this for a while. Patrick Weary is our township administrator. Paul Kittner is our township engineer, and also our director of the Department of DPW, Department of Public Works. And then, Paul, you'll introduce our consultants from NB5, Fred and Jason. And we are going to ask for all of us to speak in the mic, because that's how people on Zoom and YouTube are able to hear us. So if we get a question, if we will repeat the question into the mic, just so that we make sure everybody has an opportunity to hear us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Kittner.
Mr. DeLuca, thank you. And I want to thank everyone attending this meeting tonight. You know, this is a very important topic that we're talking about. And, you know, I've been with the township for 8 years, and I've noticed the disrepair of the walls. I think everyone driving Donnell Road sees the disrepair of the walls, and it's concerning. I think, as Mr. DeLuca said, there's an interest in the walls being in good order, maintained in good order. There's an interest for everybody to have this. So, and when there are storm events, we see the impacts of the storm events. We see the damage it causes, not just at the walls. It causes flooding through our township. It's been a challenge. You know, climate change is real. We've been trying to work to fight against climate change, and This is just one more extension of that. So we've tasked NV5, Fred Scherer and Jason Randolph, they're here today to look at some preliminary costs on the wall. Okay, these costs, I underline preliminary because they're based on tax map information. Okay, as we know, tax maps at times are not perfect. Sometimes if you have deed research or survey, it's a more accurate product if you could base it on that. So anyone listening today, if you have deeds or surveys of your property, we ask that you forward that to us so we can review those. The town is going to do their own deed research to verify, dimensions, lengths of property, et cetera. And that'll help us refine the costs and come up with something even better than what we have now. But we can only work with the information we have right now. And based on that, we came up with a spreadsheet which outlines costs under three major categories. One is repointing of the stones that exist on the wall. That's the most simplistic form of repair if that's all your property needs. And in some cases, some properties don't need any work. Depends on where the stream meanders. The second item is stone replacement. That's the most expensive form of repair. And Mr. Scherer can go into that in a little more detail, or Mr. Salmon, Jason Salmon. And then the third option is scour protection, scour replacement. What is that? Scouring of the stream is when currents of the water under high stress conditions, i.e. storm events, erode the stream floor. Okay, and what does that do? If you have a depth, a floor that is eroded, it has a tendency to undermine the walls that are out there. So if the town were to move forward with a repair, that's another consideration we'd have to make, is scour protection. So those costs are outlined in our spreadsheet for each property. Now, some properties, may front Valley Street and have a side in that direction. Others may front Donnell Road and have another cost on that. So you really have to look at the spreadsheet carefully. I just want to talk about a couple little things here. We, not that it's small, preliminary steps. So the township did, as Mr. DeLuca said, quite a bit of investigation work. We actually did a hydrologic model, preliminary model, and looked at the effects of, for example, the Oakland Dam, and determined that removing dredging that area in the direct area of the dam would help some of the properties. And the town's committed towards doing that work. I actually built that into our budget this year. So that's something that the town is going to engage in and work on, hopefully this year, assuming permitting is not a problem. And there's other costs that are built into this spreadsheet. So some of those costs, are, you could consider they're more fixed costs, right? So mobilization, permitting costs, design costs, clearing site. There's costs that are built and baked into this spreadsheet that don't vary. The costs that do vary are, okay, how much frontage do I have and what's the condition of the wall? What percentage of the wall has to be pointed? What percentage of the wall needs stone replacement? How much scour protection do I have? So Mr. Scherer is going to go through that. The advantage we talked about, and I think a letter was sent to the residents, to all of you, April 24th. And we talked about an assessment of these costs, that each of the homeowners of the township would front these costs, and there would be an assessment assigned to these costs. So, there's an advantage to being able to do that, because you could spread that cost over a period of time versus, contracting directly with a contractor. So I really think the residents should look at this carefully. and consider this as a viable option. I think for us to move forward with this, it really warrants and needs full participation here, heavy participation. Without that, I think the unit costs go through the roof and it's just untenable for the project. So I really hope that everyone considers this. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce Mr. Scherer, who could maybe just go through his model, go through some of the points, or Mr. Salmon, either one. If you want to come up and just describe what you did.
So we'll take questions from anybody in the room, but also for people who are joining us on Zoom. So if you have a question on Zoom, when we get to the part where we're taking questions, you can raise your hand on Zoom and we'll move you over to panelists. You'll have the ability to speak. We'll have the ability to see you on the screen. So for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, you can hold those questions until we're ready to take questions. Same with people in the room. But should you have something where you have a comment to make right away, feel free to raise your hand, and that's true on Zoom as well. You can raise your hand on that feature and we'll be able to see it. All right.
Good evening, everyone. So the town retained NV5 to come in and help out with this situation. And initially, we were actually looking at multiple ways of dealing with these walls. Repairing the walls is what we're talking about tonight, but we actually looked at replacing the walls in their entirety, but that became very cost prohibitive. So when comparing all options, repairing seemed to be the best approach here. So what we did is we had Jason Salmon, our structural engineer. He walked the entire water course, looked at each property. Now, we didn't do a very detailed survey of everybody's property and to determine exactly the square footage of wall replacement versus repointing. It's an estimate at this point. And just trying to get a handle on the magnitude of the costs and the work involved. And then if we get buy-in from everybody and we move this project forward, that's when we would move, like Paul was saying, get more into the detailed survey. So we know exactly where your property starts and stops. And then Jason would go back out more with more detail, and we'll actually mark the wall and determine exactly the square footage of replacement versus repointing. So just so everybody's aware, this is just an estimate, just to get us started, to get a ballpark in terms of the work required and what the cost would be. There's a 30% contingency that we built into this as well, because it's a preliminary estimate. And like Paul was saying, we try to include everything that would be required, from consulting fees, permit fees, putting the permit documents together, the contract documents, construction support. So everything that would have to be done from now to the completion of construction has been accounted for in these numbers. So we do have a plan what we prepared, which illustrates the properties in relation to the water course and where the scour holes are that we identified. And those are areas like Paul was explaining, where the channel has eroded. It's scoured out. It's lost the grade. And as a result of that, the walls are starting to collapse and the foundations are gone. So that's why we need to get in there and repair those walls sooner than later. So we have the plan, we have the matrix. Everybody was given a copy. We have a blow-up version, so it's easier to see. And we have some pictures of the walls for each of the properties. So if you want to, I don't know how we're going to do this, if we're going to come up and you're going to look at or talk about your particular property, and we can get into the further discussions about each individual property. We can do that whenever the time is right. That's all I have for now. Yeah. Jason, I'll have Jason explain it since he was the one who did it. Thanks.
Hey guys, don't forget to, if you're not on the mic, to repeat it for the Zoom audience, because we couldn't hear what Mr. DeLuca was saying.
Mr. DeLuca just asked what the process was as far as how we made an assessment of the area that needed to be repaired. My name's Jason Salmon. I'm a structural engineer with NV5. So I walked up and down the waterway and made an assessment just based on what I was seeing out there. So the so based on where I saw your where I saw the features on the property were located is how I would determine how I would use that information to compare against the tax map. And so that's how we would, in essence, assign repair areas to each property. So it is it could be refined, I would say that. And that, like Fred was speaking to, that's would be part of the next steps. But it does give a ballpark idea of magnitude of cost. So again, I walked up and down the stream and noted where I saw areas that needed repointing to get a general magnitude of that, as well as where the wall was, where the stones had been collapsed and where the footing was missing. That would be a case where you'd use more of a stone repair or a wall type repair. We did a similar repair south of Oakland, right across from the fire station just this past year. So I don't know if any of you had seen what was going on there, but that can give you an idea about what would be entailed in the repair that we would anticipate here too. So again, moving forward, if the project does go forward, that would be the next step. I would walk along the waterway and actually mark out with keel, paint, something, so I can better define each area. And once we know exactly where each property is, then we could match those areas to each property. And so that would be the next steps moving forward. If you have any questions on procedure, I'm happy to address them. Or
Excuse me. Hey, Patrick, do we have any, or Paul, do we have any of the documents you have on the table there digitally so we can share on Zoom or no?
Yes, we do. And I think that since we're talking about the assessment of the walls themselves, we have pictures of the wall, Jason, that you shared with us. And maybe we could scroll through them and you could show us, we don't need to look at every one, but typically when you're looking at the wall, when you see that picture, what do you see as requiring replacement, requiring repair? Can you identify, and you can use a screen, identify where you see scouring and what that means for the stability of the wall? So I'm going to share on the screen and you're going to see it on the monitor as well, the pictures that you took during your inspection.
Great, that'll be helpful. Thanks, Patrick.
thank you.
So that, and I'll blow it up as much as I can here.
It's
So,
pretty good. Pat.
Okay, in this case here, you can see some of the areas down near the water line. You can see the mortar between the stone is missing. That would be a case where a repointing condition or repointing type repair would be called for.
Does that tree need to come out? Like, are you sealing up these areas where you're able to see growth through?
Yes, wherever vegetation is coming through the wall, we would take that out first. Yeah.
All right.
Vegetation retaining walls they don't work well together.
Sure.
Yeah, gentleman asked if we could identify what the outfall pipe here is, and I myself can't without us doing some more research into that.
So an area like this, you're talking about rebuilding a wall, backfill, grading, like what do you want to see here as a finished product, and how would, you know, the repairs that you're envisioning as part of this process, how would they apply here? How would they be implemented?
Sure. So the first step here would be to excavate what the sections of wall that have already been that have already failed. And part of that, in addition to that, we would set up what's called a coffer dam to keep water out of where the repair area would be, so the workers would work in the dry. And that could be as simple as a sandbag lined area, lined in plastic, so just to maintain a watertight barrier. In essence, you're creating a dam around the construction area. Then contractor would excavate that out, go down typically 3 feet below the ground surface, so you get below a frost line. And then you reconstruct the footing. And then once you have the footing in place and cured, then you start rebuilding the stones on top of that, placing stones and mortar back up to the existing height of the wall. And so we have a wall on either side, so we would match into that elevation. Yes, yeah. And that, any repair is going to be similar in nature. This would just be more extensive area.
When you do the repair on this type of wall, are you reusing the stone that's already there, wall segments that are there? Will it have the same look as other areas of the wall that remain intact?
Yeah, wherever possible, we would try and use the existing stone. Yeah, if it's available, we'll try and use that. Yeah.
At any point, would it be like a poured concrete wall, or would you try to remain that field stone structure?
I would say the footing below grade that wouldn't be visible could be poured concrete. That would give you a good stable base. It could be reinforced to maintain a good solid foundation. And then on top of that, where it would be visible, then you could go back into the stone.
Sort of
want-
like what we did with the by the Duck Pond Bridge, where it was sectioned off so that workers could rebuild the stone bridge. I mean, the stone wall, sorry.
In areas like this where the property owner has obviously rebuilt a portion of this wall with poured concrete, are you making any adjustments to the poured concrete, or are you, is that satisfactory to you and you're just going to improve the areas that are unsatisfactory?
At this point, the wall seems to be in adequate condition. So it's doing the job that it was intended to do.
All right. And then I want one more where there's a good amount of scour underneath the wall. Okay, so this one. So, because we talk about scour, and I think this is part of what you're looking at here, right?
This is one area, but this is more to do with water at degradation of the wall at the water line, which could occur based on freeze thaw. If water gets into the joints, it could pop out the mortar and then the stones fail. If you go further up the stream,
Stream, all right.
you will, I can point out an area that does show fairly significant scour.
All right, you let me know when to stop here.
Like right here I think next picture up maybe.
This one? Or the next one down, yeah.
I think try the next one up. Because yeah. Yep, maybe not.
I'll keep going. You let me know when to stop.
Right, yep. Like this shows one area. This is a little deeper area right here. And so because of the velocities of the water, it does take out the soil that's underneath the footing. So when the footing goes, then there's no support for a mortared wall. And so at that point, the stones start falling down because they're not supported from underneath. All the way up, it is the most significant area of scour, and that's a very visible area. If you would keep scrolling up, I can show that.
The same way I'm going or the other direction? You mean?
Keep same way you're going.
All right.
Go back a little bit.
This one here, yeah.
This is a good representation of scour. This is on the outside of a bend where the highest velocities of water are during a storm event. And you can see here's a footing, and you can see how it's dark under here. All underneath this wall, there is just a void filled with water. And so if you like the picture that maybe you remember that you could see just the other side of where this ladder was, the whole wall is collapsed. And that is likely a result of this same thing occurring just downstream. So this would be an evidence of what scour would do and why it would need to be repaired.
Could we have either Jason or Fred describe what we're going to do near the dam and what the result of that, what benefit will that provide, if any?
Sure. Just downstream of Oakland, there's a concrete structure. We're referring to it as a dam. The river drops several feet. And behind the dam, it's all filled with sediment right now. When it was originally built, that wasn't the case. The river bottom was about 3 or 4 feet lower than it is now. And then that sediment level has carried back way upstream, several properties upstream of Oakland. So as part of this project that we're talking about, we're going to remove all that sediment that has accumulated, go back to the original invert of the river bottom. And from our modeling, it shows that that's going to improve the hydraulic flow under the bridge and over the dam structure. Even though we're keeping the concrete dam, we're going to remove all the sediment that has accumulated below. And that will have a hydraulic benefit to properties upstream of Oakland. Doesn't, solve any major problems, but it's definitely going to be a help.
Why we are talking about benefits? We want to be very transparent here because a lot of you have, over the years, had serious impacts to your property. Floyd took out garages. Even these storms now, you're seeing your backyards full of water. So we are not saying that the repair of the walls will solve the flooding problem. Is that correct? So let's just be, what is the benefit then of doing the wall if it doesn't solve the flooding problem?
Maintain the walls in good structural condition. So like Jason was showing a little while ago, the walls do not collapse. And now instead of going in and fixing what you have, you're actually rebuilding the entire wall, which is going to be even more costly. And then that material that falls into the river has to be removed because it creates an obstruction and therefore will increase flooding in the area. So it's just something that, even though it's not going to be giving you any additional flood protection beyond what you started with, you're just pretty much stabilizing the walls that you have, and so that it can withstand future flooding events, and you don't end up with something that's going to be more expensive to fix.
Mr. Chair, I think also just capitalizing on what you said, it's improving the resiliency of the wall system itself, right? If we have a major storm event and
It's not picking up.
I'm sorry, if we have a major storm event and the wall collapses, we could have flooding of our streets, flooding of our, conveyances or stormwater conveyances. It could cause extensive damage. So by rebuilding the walls, you're improving that resiliency and you're lessening the chance that a major storm event could do something like that.
Yeah, I think we're ready for comments and questions. So we're ready for comments and questions, because I don't think we have any. I think you've gotten all the information we have, but let's just go back and forth so we can, help you. We're going to do the people here first, and then we'll ask the people on Zoom if they have any questions. So again, we will repeat the question just so everyone hears it. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to use a mic. Just make people come up and use a microphone.
So the comment there, it wasn't a question, it was a comment based on experience, that it's your opinion that if the walls are back to the height they're supposed to be, that will help with the flooding situation and the flow of the river. Is that what, correct? Okay.
And I would agree. I think there's limited circumstances, and that
Right.
was one of them. I
Right.
saw the picture I think you're referring to.
Yeah.
There is limited circumstances where rebuilding the wall and having that full height would likely help in that situation that you're referring to.
We don't know what it is because he's not.
Mayor.
Mayor Adams, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think it would be helpful for those on Zoom. I think there's like 12 of us. To have people use the mic so we can hear a full comment, maybe up at the podium for any comment or question.
Question here.
Yeah, why don't you come up to the mic? Thank you.
I live on 70 Tunnel Road, and from what I understand is the walls is the private property of the owners, right? So then if the state river is damaging our private property, shouldn't they be fixing all this?
Well, first of all, I think that's a legal question, probably for our township attorney to answer, and I don't believe she's present today. So. But practically speaking, the state, I mean, Fred, do you know of instances where the state has fixed walls based on their waterways? Okay, so practically they're not going to help you there.
Yeah, so, you know, we've looked at that and there's no indication that the state will take any responsibility for the wall. In fact, the wall doesn't have to be there. The wall can just go onto your property and erode your property. But I don't think you want that to happen.
And just to clarify, you know, the water of the state, it's a regulated body by the state. I don't know if they're taking full ownership of the water. Is that correct, Mr. Scheer?
The state, they require that you allow for the free flow of the water through the property. And so if there is an obstruction, then the state could come after the homeowner to fix that. So they're not taking any, responsibility to maintain the water courses or any walls that exist along those water bodies. So, but they can come after you if it's creating an obstruction and they want to do something about that.
So why don't you come on up, if you don't mind, it's just easier.
The one where the wall is totally down. Does it have to be a stone wall or can it be concrete? Would concrete be less expensive? Because you're talking about $190,000 for me and it's not going to happen.
Well, let's answer that. We'll answer that two ways. From an engineering perspective, and then we'll answer it from a town perspective.
The answer to your question is yes. If you want to rebuild the wall with another material that's cheaper, you can do that. And the cost that we're putting in here per square foot of wall, I would say it's on the high side. And it builds in all of the access problems, the fact that we have to put matting down in the river in order to track along to get from one property to another. So there's a lot of elements of construction that have to get accounted for, and that gets built into the cost per square foot for wall repair. So if this goes out to bid and the bids come in and it's competitive, maybe the prices will be much less, but it might be more. We don't know. This is just an estimate now, but yes, there is cheaper options for reconstructing a wall or replacing the wall.
I think, we looked into that as well, other options, and I think we determined to keep the aesthetic and the look of that waterway. The town is willing to participate in the assessment if we're rebuilding the walls in kind, the look of the walls in kind. So that's what these numbers are based on, and that's what our assessment is based on as well. So we're only considering rebuilding the existing walls in kind.
Right, so just again, the walls are the property of the property owner. The town cannot force you to replace the walls. It can't force you to use a certain material. What we can say is that if a property owner wanted to go out on their own, we would have specifications that that property owner would have to meet, correct?
We have basic details and standards, I think, that we'd want to see a property owner rebuild the wall too, yes.
So we would be able to require whoever does that would have to meet the standards. Additionally, the cost that we would be able to get the work done, because we would do it as a unified cost and we would dam up the river once, would be cheaper than any individual property owner per square foot, I think. You're just talking about the material, but the workers and the access and all that is also a major part of it. So, but we are willing to have those conversations with each property owner. The position of the town from Oakland down to where we no longer own it on Baker, we own the part from Oakland to Baker down to the golf course, and then the golf course has their own. We've replaced the rocks in kind. So we are, we're trying to respect the historic nature of the walls. But again, we will have those conversations with individual property owners. Do you want to come on up? Sorry for this. We have a very awkward system here, but this is the best way for everyone to hear it.
We just noticed, in the spreadsheet that there's sort of devastating cost for a few properties and reasonable cost for a lot of properties. Are there any ways that those costs could be mitigated over a certain amount so we're not bankrupting the people at 16 Jefferson Avenue? Versus, we happen to be on a good stretch apparently. I'm at 533 Valley Street, so I'm looking across the river at your property where the wall's down. So I'm wondering, has everything been exhausted in terms of finding maybe infrastructure bill that was passed last year by Congress that's supposed to help with mitigate storm? Is there anything to do for the people that are looking at catastrophic financial news?
Thank you. We recognize this sticker shock for everybody because even if it's, we have a couple, obviously we have one property that all the walls that they own, it's $1 million. But in this particular case, we're talking, almost $500,000. So the answer is that we've had some conversations. Again, because the walls are privately owned, we have not been able to identify any public dollars that we can bring in here, nor our own public dollars to pay for private improvement. But we're going to continue to have those conversations because this really works if we get everybody's participation. Because if we, and in this particular case, and I don't want to really speak about any individual properties, but there are some properties that are, are more affected by this because their homes are closer or structures on their property are closer. So we do want to have conversations with each property owner to see what we can do. I don't know if we'll be able to find any public money that we'll be able to use on private property though. We've been kicking it around. We kicked it around internally. And that was some of the reason why we weren't able. We had originally tried to meet and have this information later in the year last year, but we couldn't get our arms around how to do this private improvement because, honestly, when the walls are built, when the walls are rebuilt, that improvement goes to the private property owner. That private property owner will be able to say to any future owner of that property that the walls are built and they can show that the property is stable back there. So that's where we are. We can't find any public money to do this. I want to get the people on Zoom. Let's see if they have questions.
Anybody joining us on Zoom would like to speak, please raise your hand now and we'll move you over to public portion. All right, so I'm moving over Darren Sager. Welcome, Darren. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I guess Vic, you and I back, I think it was in 98 or 99 after Floyd walked, you were nice enough to come by and you and I walked the river in the back. And at that time, because of all the water that flowed through, there was like a massive amount of rocks and debris that had built up in many areas in behind a lot of the yards. And Maplewood was nice enough to somehow figure out they brought a bulldozer in, I think from the Valley Street side, and literally cleared out back that whole section that we're talking about tonight. But the issue with that was, and on the very next heavy downpour, with all the areas of the turns and everything, and you get back pressure, it literally built up all again, like in a very, very short period of time. So now you're talking about the idea of going down by the dam, by the bridge, by Oakland, and clearing that out. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be the same scenario that we have right now, where it's just going to build up over time. It's putting a Band-Aid on the problem, and it's just going to fill up with more debris because that section of river significantly slows down and you have a lot less flow underneath the bridge. And this is why it backs up. And this is why 68, 70 probably gets more water built up in their basement because of the fact that that bridge is so low. And I understood, that it had to be that way because of the fire trucks having to get across and everything. But if you're going to continue to have that back pressure, the issues that we have right now are just going to, continue to happen again. So why not lower the dam wall, even just by a couple feet? And it would significantly, reduce the amount of back pressure behind the wall. You have all the fields per se that go through the park that can add as like an additional buffer should extra water go through versus the yards back there. Have you given any thought to that in reducing the dam wall?
Are we prohibited from doing that by like DEP because of the effects downstream?
We have looked at it, and I'm going to ask Fred and Paul to respond.
So NV5 did look at this hydraulically. I think if I'm not mistaken, you pulled the FEMA model mapping from there and some of their models and looked at that and concluded that dredging it was actually as effective or similar in terms of effect than removing the wall, the dam.
But it's still, again, it's temporary because what's going to happen is since it's a very slow section, it's just going to build up again like it is right now.
And it is
that's
going to have to periodically be maintained. There's no question about that. Over time, it will fill again, and we'll have to maintain that. That dam is put in place, I'm guessing for a number of reasons. I know that the duck pond draws water from that dam. There's an intake right there. And there's a piping system that goes all through the park and actually feeds the duck pond. So there's a hydraulic aspect to this. There would also be a permitting aspect to it. You'd have to, and Mr. Sher could go into this in more detail, but I think there'd be a significant amount of permitting that would also be involved in modeling, and it would take quite a bit of time. And I don't know, Mr. Sher, do you have an opinion as to whether or not what the effort would be? And you did the analysis, so do you have any comments versus dredging versus removing the wall, the effectiveness?
Yes, we looked at it at a preliminary level, and we determined that if we take the wall out, there's a good chance it's going to increase flooding downstream, and you're not allowed to do that. So it would have been, we could go through a more elaborate analysis where we have to study that change in water surface much further downstream, and we didn't do that level of detail modeling, but we did notice that there would be an increase, but we'd have to do a much more extensive model to determine how far that increase goes downstream, and does it come out of the banks and affect other property owners? Because if it does, then we can't get a permit from DP to do it. So the decision was made, let's at least dredge it. Let's do something that is going to provide an immediate improvement to the properties upstream. And like Paul said, over 20, 40 years, yes, it will silt in again over time, especially if scour holes are not eliminated and the walls are not fixed. So it's just a matter of time before more scour occurs. That material is then moved out from the channel, and it'll deposit itself back behind the dam again. But that'll take many, many years before that would fill in again. And so it was determined that let's at least do that. And so that's what we're doing.
And Mr. Chair, I think with the walls in disrepair, obviously that condition's accelerated with rocks dropping out and falling into the waterway. If the walls are in integral and in good shape, good repair, then you're going to have less of that deposition there.
Yes.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
So again, owning the property there since 98, it seems that in the past few tax reassessments, we've been singled out on this block. And I think the one before this got hit with literally the highest tax increases in the entire town. And the side of the block, obviously, that has the river, we have much higher assessments than the other side of the block that's on the the railroad side. And all of us have flood insurance that we need to have, therefore having a higher cost, and flood insurance rates have gone up dramatically. And so now on top of this, you're asking, many of the owners now to get hit with a special tax assessment on top of that. And obviously the bill that what you're asking for to do, I understand, is not all due in a single year, and it's payable over 15 years, which makes it, more palatable. But still, is there any reason why this particular block is in some way singled out and not included in a greater section of town? And us having such, I guess I'd say, higher tax rates than other areas?
I can answer that. So your assessment is based solely on your property value. So the residential property is based off of, typically we look at resale. So we're looking at comps. We're looking at other houses that are similar to yours that have sold recently. What did they sell for? What's their square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, lot size? And so your property is, your assessment is based on solely off of the value of your property. I understand that there may be drawbacks to your property, one of which may be the condition of the walls and the frequency of flooding, the fact that you have to have or you may have flood insurance. But even given those circumstances or given those expenses, your properties are still selling at a relatively high dollar amount or a dollar amount at least that correlates directly to your assessed value. So it's I understand your frustration, but
well, I guess it really just comes down to, like, why is this one section of road between Jefferson and Oakland literally like its own island and deemed in a different way versus other sections of town? That's what I'm kind of confused about. Even right around the corner is on Jefferson, is in a different section. At least that's what I saw on the last assessment, because I wasn't given a copy of how they broke up the different sections in this most recent assessment.
Mhm.
So it just doesn't make sense that, like, literally about I don't know, like 20 to 30 properties were literally one section of town, and others, like you literally had, thousands. So,
Every property owner during the reassessment had an opportunity to meet with the reassessment company and discuss with them why their property was valued or assessed at the dollar value that it was. They can talk about what comps they used, what area, because we do use a map, and we identify specific areas of town that have like values, like properties. And all that's all public information and available to you. It was much more available through the revaluation process. We actually had the company here in Town Hall willing to meet with any resident, but it's still available to you through the tax assessor, which is in our finance office. And you can reach out to them anytime for more information specific to your property value.
all right, appreciate it.
So
You're
let's go to the next question.
All right, moving over 60 Donnell. All right, welcome 60 Donnell. You may unmute yourself and ask your question.
So we just have a question. This is 60 and actually 62 as well. When we've been going through some of the information, especially after this meeting, we were just wondering, we understand that this is kind of just the quicker fixes as well as aesthetic in terms of updating the fallen pieces, helping repair the pieces that are there. We were wondering if we're already going through all the trouble of assessing the wall and working with the wall, uh, even if it's raising it a foot or two, is it something that we can get estimates for to see? Because that would help mitigate a little bit of the water that's coming on. In addition, another portion we wanted to know is, has there been any studies or estimates done, especially in particular for our property at 60 Donnell, where the river does curve and our properties hit very hard with any time there's any rain. Hence the reason why we poured concrete at one point in time, because the stone wall just would not stay. We lost our whole entire garage in a flood. It just, you saw pieces of it in the park. So we were just wondering, has any assessments been done in terms of that? Is there anything we can do during this project, since we're already going to be in there working on the wall to address any of those issues for in particular properties that are hit very hard?
I think I can answer this. So I think that's a great question. And, the purpose of this program is to first, let's bring our walls in good order and get the resiliency factored in. When you're talking about raising the wall levels, you're talking about changing the hydraulics, potentially the waterway, and I think that would invoke additional permitting and DEP requirements. Mr. Sher, do you want to expand on that a little further? Why we're not just raising all the wall elevations?
Yeah, when we set out to look at the wall condition and scenario and trying to help mitigate flooding, we did evaluate raising the walls, and we were finding out that by doing that, that was creating an increase in the water surface upstream on select properties. So we'd have to get permission from certain homeowners to allow increases on their property. And as a result, we determined that probably wasn't going to happen. I'm not sure who would allow an increase on their property in terms of a flood elevation. So that brought us back to, let's fix what we have. And the only way to help mitigate flooding is looking at doing something upstream. And I understand the Corps of Engineers is looking at things they might be able to do in the future. But we determined raising the walls here will have an effect upstream, and therefore we eliminated, we stopped looking at that option further.
There would also be permitting implications too, right, with that?
Yeah. Well, we'd have to submit our models to the DEP, and when we show them there's an increase upstream. Now, if the increase stayed within the channel, that would be acceptable. But once it goes out of the banks and affects somebody's structure, you have to get permission from the impacted property owner to allow that to happen. And that, as soon as we saw that situation, there's no sense of going further with this, because very doubtful these homeowners will allow an increase in flooding.
Fred,
So would that also, I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, was that also going to be what affects I mean, in particular, I'm asking about 60 Denell, very particular about that. It's just, so if we did any sort of information on reinforcing the wall right there, I guess it's the same process in terms of permitting and then seeing the assessments if it affects any other properties.
I'm not sure I quite understood all that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood. Can you restate your question?
Yeah, so at 60 Denell, at 60 to 62 Denell, we're at a particular point in the brook where the stone wall makes a curve. So everything that's been coming straight on from Jefferson kind of hits that curve and then gets redirected through the natural flow of the brook itself. But we've noticed over time, we've been in this property for over 40 years. We've noticed over time, we take a very large brunt to the point where our garage is gone. We've lost our driveway, what, 3-4 times now? It just gets lifted up and taken away. It's just because of the flow of the water. It follows, once it goes over that wall, it wants to go over the clearest path, which is straight, which goes onto the property. So I was just wondering if there's anything that's been done to assess that pressure that comes from Jefferson into the curve that goes onto Oakland.
I think
This is the property.
Yeah. So, yeah, if the question is, have we tried to figure out a way to get less water coming down this section of the river? We have spoken to the Army Corps of Engineer. That means that there has to be a detention basin. Is it retention or detention? Same. A detention basin upstream. And that means you have to find property for that to happen. I mean, you all know where we have our detention space here in Maplewood, and that's the golf course on the other side, on the south side of Baker. I'm sorry, on the south side of Pearson.
Yeah.
When the water, it's not even designed for that. It just happened. Well, it's a natural design for that. But if we had to work with the Army Corps of Engineers, we would have to have for them to construct some type of detention basin upstream. And we don't think that's going to be in the short term. If that was even possible, we're probably talking 20 years from now. That's how the Army Corps, I mean, you've all been reading about the shore losing their beaches and how for 20 years they've been talking about it. That's how long we've been talking to the Army Corps about trying to get them to do this. So at this point, we don't see any way to reduce the flow of water that comes between Jefferson and Oakland.
Fred,
Okay. Doesn't hurt to ask.
Fred, could I get you to, so the Army Corps of Engineers many years ago did the project in South Orange along the same river, right? So upstream from where we're talking about between Jefferson and Oakland is, I don't even know if there are any there might be a little bit, probably like West Parker, but once you get into South Orange, there's Chiswood's Field, then there's the DPW yard, which already floods. But then just after that, there are higher walls through South Orange Village, under South Orange Avenue. So I'm wondering about the effect of higher walls in this area to the extent that you were talking about that it would affect upstream, that maybe it doesn't have quite the impact that we think. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. So
the property upstream, you have the YMCA owns part of that property from Jefferson to Parker. The school board owns the other piece of property there. Once you get on the other side of Parker, you have the school board on one side, and you have the new complex that's going up where Gleason's was. So those would be the properties upstream that would have the immediate impact. As I understand, and I was not around when the walls were built in South Orange, that there was some conversation with people in Maplewood about constructing similar types of walls that would go all the way through Memorial Park and it was rejected by Maplewood. Because the walls in South Orange are ugly and just different. And they're different. I mean, you know,
No, and they're higher,
yeah,
they're
so
higher.
yeah, and so that is, you know, it's a completely different model, and as I understand it, the decision makers in Maplewood did not want that kind of a river system going through Memorial Park.
Yeah, I understand that, and I know because, you know, for a long time, South Orange was trying to get, make more aesthetic improvements to their existing Army Corps project, but I was just thinking of it more of, you know, since that project's there, that has kept South Orange Village from downtown from flooding since they built that Army Corps project. Those walls are higher, and so I was just merely thinking about how the higher walls in Maplewood Memorial Park or along Donnell would increase the water upstream. So there's probably, I don't know, maybe something to take a peek at without necessarily spending too much time if it's not feasible because of the properties between the Army Corps project in South Orange and Maplewood Park.
Let's go to the next question online.
Moving Mustafa Ahmed to panelist. Welcome, Mustafa. You may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, how are you? Patrick, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Darren Sager mentioned in regards to the property tax assessment. I know you said that, you know, the appraisers came out and we had the opportunity to talk to them. I just wanted to ask, why was the appraiser's value so low compared to what the Maplewood Township had? For example, at I think 3638, the appraiser said we were at 940 assessed, and then all of a sudden Maplewood Township shot me up to 1.15. That's such a big gap and difference.
Yeah, so we're not able to discuss any particular assessment. That would have to be done. Actually, May 1st was the date, right? Yeah, so it is, anyone who had a concern about their assessment had until May 1st to challenge it in court. I'm sorry, in the tax board, Essex County Tax Board. There's also there's a firewall between the tax assessor and the government. We do not, on the township committee or any of the people in this room, assess the property. That's done by the tax assessor, and it's done in an arm's length process from the government so that there's no political or any kind of interference with the assessment. The assessment is done by sales and the character. Darren was talking about the nature of the block. That's all calculated by the assessor and by the assessing firm. And if individual property owners have a concern about their assessment, they need to speak to the tax assessor. We can't deal with it tonight. So let's go to the next question. Yes, let's go. We have a question here. You can come on up. Thank you.
Reese Evans, 48-50 Donnell and 52-54 Donnell. So I just listening to you guys talk, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done. It seems like the dam and the incredible runoff that we get, because we're in a very low area, everything's running into this waterway or whatever we call it, is causing it's a big cause of what's happening over there. Have you given any thought to, like, could the town take ownership of the wall and then you guys can fix it up as you deem that you want it to be fixed up a certain way? Because we've been reaping all the benefits of all the flooding from all the, you know what I mean, from all that. Like, why not give away that section to the town? You guys can fix it up any way you want to fix it up. Because we're all going to be tied together. At some point, it's going to end up flooding so bad that the fire department's going to be affected. And like, we're all tied together with this little tiny section. Is there any way to have eminent domain and take the walls and you guys can fix it up? I think this might be a little low, but $1.9 million. But why have just so few residents bear the cost of $1.9 million when really the whole town is kind of dumping all of the water into this waterway right there, and it's coming down, and the walls have fallen and everything like that. To have somebody's on here for $450,000, that's unfair. I myself, I'm $80,000. That just doesn't seem fair. If you could take eminent domain, and I'm speaking above my pay grade, I don't know eminent domain. I've heard that term. Somehow maybe we could work something along those lines would be fair because we're all in this town. I pay my taxes to Maplewood. Other people do. It just seems to be able to spread the cost across the whole town is far easier than for just us to bear the cost of fixing it. That's
I appreciate the question. I think that your premise is the dam is causing damage to the walls upstream, and therefore the town should consider that. And I think I would challenge your premise in terms of whether it's causing the damage. I think and I'll let Jason speak and Fred speak if they want, but I think the damage is caused by these heavy storm events, constant erosion, the sheer force of the water against the mortar and underneath. Well, that's actually going to slow the water down to a certain extent, but that would reduce the shear force on the wall. So I don't want to sound, too nerdy here and engineerish, but I don't agree with your premise, okay, respectfully, and I'll leave it at that. What? Yeah.
So just for you folks out there, the comment is that the small number of property owners on this stretch are bearing a disproportionate cost because the benefit is beyond that, beyond just that block. It's because there's drainage coming. I think the other thing is that this waterway is not the only waterway that we have in town that's similar. We have other similar properties that are affected. We're dealing with the situation in the Lightning Brook right now on off of Boyden Avenue. Same type of thing. And so there's I can't say that we haven't discussed it. We have discussed it. Not so much eminent domain, but acquiring the property, and you can acquire it, friendly and unfriendly. I don't think we would want anything we want to do. We want to do cooperatively. So, yeah, I understand. But no. Well, I don't. You don't know because I think we'd have to really think through, because then the walls become ours, and what happens to your property, and do you get use of it, and of the walls or, and anything there. So, no, I understand that. And it's not something that we haven't discussed and thought of.
I also think it's worth reminding something that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting is that we know that the walls need repair, but there's not this expectation that the repair of the wall will alleviate the flooding problems on these individual properties, right? So I think it's fair for you to say that as far as water travels, that this low area collects from a large area of town, and maybe you find that unfair. But the project we're talking about now in the wall repair won't alleviate the issues you may feel in flooding, right? And so, yeah. Yeah.
I don't think
Right. I understand. We do. Moving over, Kay Maynard. Welcome to comment, K Maynard. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks. So my husband spoke a little earlier, and we're at 533 Valley Street, and we're impacted by wall damage at other parts of the river system. So particularly the MAP building, and the damage that's been incurred there. So, and every time it rains, we have PTSD, and I'm sandbagging our basement. Has there been any consideration for any temp fixes for the walls, whether it's sandbagging, and I'm speaking really specifically about the damage on the MAP at the MAP building site, whether it's sandbagging or, some other better technology. I don't really care about aesthetics at this point because, it's like a slow death as, whenever it rains or if there's a larger storm. Now the flooding comes in over the MAP building's damaged walls across the parking lot directly into our yard. So I was just wondering, while we're waiting for this perm fix, which I hope happens ultimately, is there a temporary fix that can occur at the really weak points? Thanks.
I can't think of a temporary fix using sandbags. I can say there
Well-
was the interim work that we're doing by dredging near the dam. And that should provide some relief for some of the properties, but I can't think of a temporary relief using sandbags.
Well, I use sandbags as an example, not understanding what else there could be used, but has there been consideration of a temp fix at all?
I think the only temporary repair that could be considered might be the use of large diameter riprap against the embankments as a
Mhm.
temporary stone. We call it riprap. It's large diameter stone, and it interlocks, and that could be a temporary solution. But that also has a tendency to restrict the waterway, and that could cause flooding upstream as well. Additional flooding. It could also channelize the water. It could reduce the channel cross section. So I think at best that's a temporary repair.
Right. But, storm season is right around the corner.
I'm now moving Daniel over. Welcome, Daniel. You may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Super. So I think the point Mayor Adams raised, and I think Kay did a moment ago, I think we're obviously struggling here a little bit with form over function. So I appreciate aesthetics important. The town wants to help us, but as we've mentioned a few times, this is a private stretch of property. So I guess just a simple question of how many folks in Maplewood are going to see this stretch of the river? People aren't down there every day. They shouldn't be. I see, students from the school near the river that shouldn't be. But if we think about the pure aesthetics in the Maplewood Park, I understand it's a beautiful area. We as a family spend a lot of time there. The duck pond is charming. But when we think about the gap between the bridge that we're talking about there at Oakland up to Jefferson, how many people are really walking that stretch of land? They shouldn't be back there unless they have our permission as owners. So I think as a group, if we're comfortable with a more sufficient solution, which might be cheaper, as was mentioned earlier with concrete, it feels like we're being offered help here as long as we play by the rules of using stone that's been repointed, which I understand is a very laborious and expensive task. If we as a group of property owners agree that we think concrete is sufficient, and to the question of potentially raising it, I know we have to do more modeling, but I think if we could do some more modeling here, I think, Fred, from an engineering perspective, you talked about let's not remove the dam, but even lowering it slightly, what the impact would be there. So we have all of the information to make that decision, because if we're saying it has to be stone or we get no help, and I think the points are made several times now, it will not improve the flooding situation. Are we really doing this from an aesthetic perspective or a prevention perspective when we think there are potentially materials there that could be more effective and have a longer term lasting impact? So I just wanted to ask that question as a start. I've got a few more here, but keen to kind of get an initial reaction to that, given that we're the ones that live on that stretch of the river.
So just on that, this is going to be a voluntary partnership between the town and the property owners if we move forward. So we will take what you just said, the materials that are used there into consideration when we continue this conversation going forward. We have not done that cost estimate. That would, we would have to take the linear feet and figure out what it would cost to do a different material. And then we would have to have, more conversation with you. We will do that just so that we have that information, because we want to have that information to be able to have that discussion with you.
Thank you, Mr. DeLuca. I think that would be helpful for all parties concerned, just to see what our full range of options are. I appreciate stone is beautiful, but as was mentioned by Mayor Adams in South Orange, and by one of our neighbours here that have used an element of concrete, and it was mentioned as being sufficient by the engineer that spoke, I think we do need to have that as a potential option on the table so that we can make an informed decision. Like I say, I saw the pointing work that was done by the opposite of the fire station. It looks great. It's a very small amount of wall that was repaired, as mentioned by the neighbours at 515. Opposite my backyard here, where we are at 44-46, the trees are falling into the river now. They're collapsing away. And I think, Darren Sager made a very good point of the dredging. If it's happening that close to the dam, how far up the stream can we do some dredging? Because I remember when we first moved here 4 or 5 years ago, you had to take a little step ladder down to get to where the bed of the river is. Now you just step down. Every flood is depositing more and more. So a question there around the materials, how far the dredging will be going back up the stream, when we think we'll be tendering with these contractors as mentioned in the letter that was shared on the 24th of April, and if there's a high level estimate of when the start date of this project could be if we all reach consensus, and when it would complete by, again, mentioned by M. Kaynard, storm season's around the corner. So do we have a high level estimate of the start and finish date of this type of work?
No, because we have a lot of, there's a lot of agreements that we have to make with each property owner. There's not only to the agreement on the repairs, but we have to have access construction easements in order to get in there. And we have to take a look. There's a lot of stuff involved here. So, this is really, again, continuing the conversation. We're going to go back and do our homework and come back and have more conversation with you. So there's no date to start this. The one thing we do have is we did put in the 2024 capital budget, the cleaning of the area in front of the dam. And that is, I don't know the timeline there, but my sense is that we're ready to go out to do that work this year. Is that correct?
I think it could be done this year. Do you agree, Mr. Chair?
Yes, we're under contract now. We're doing the permit documents and preparing the plans for that dredging. So it usually takes probably a couple of months more to get our documents together, and then probably 4 months to go through permitting, and then it has to go out for construction. So probably late this year, it might be feasible. And as far as the answer to one of the questions was how far the dredging will go, it's roughly 300 feet upstream of Oakland is how far the dredging operation will go.
No more questions.
You had a question? You had a question back there, no? You were just waving? Okay. No? Okay. I thought you had your hand up. Yes. Can you mind coming up?
So based on the numbers that we have for the repair cost, I don't think there's any scenario, even if it's 30% less, that we can have an agreement with all of these owners, especially the one with like 400,000, 700, even over 100,000. So what is the next step? And also it does not alleviate the flooding problem. So the problem still exists. So there is no way people will pay for it. And is there a solution if we dig deeper, like 3 feet, and maybe that will reduce the flooding instead of like working on the wall, reduce the riverbed by 3 feet and have more room for the water to flow in and out?
So I don't want to act like an engineer, but I understand that to clean the bed of the river. It's called scouring is that correct? No. Okay. All right, good. But to clean the bed of the river, at least, and I'm going to ask you to speak about, the concern is to do that without the stabilization of the walls will just undermine the walls more. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would put a tremendous pressure on the walls. Many of them would collapse if you just dug down. So if you're talking about trying to dig further down, then you're talking about probably reconstructing all of the walls. Is that fair, Jason?
Well, let me ask this question. Yeah, because you're saying fixing the walls won't solve the flooding problem, but if you fix the walls, would you be able to clean the bottom of the river and deepen that at all?
If we fix the walls and they're in good repair, I'm sure there's some dredging of that material we could take out, but I wouldn't say we could go down 3 feet because that's below the footing at this point. So you're still undermining the walls if you went down that deep. Some of the places where it has accumulated and is visibly accumulated, that type of material we could probably take out, but we're not going to go down 3 feet. We can't do that with the current walls.
I was just wondering, since these walls are private property in little chunks, but they are definitely one continuous system, and we don't get any benefit privately from our little chunk of wall, particularly. It's about restraining the river. It's not about beautifying our yards or giving us something to put plants on. Would this be better tackled with like an association of neighbors that border the river, to be a collective to deal with it moving forward? Also, I think if it had been on any of our minds, or anybody's mind 25 years ago to do ongoing repairs to this system, it probably could have gotten to, been much cheaper to maintain it. And probably going forward, it should be maintained if we're spending this money on it. And if they stay private, that's not going to happen person by person, but maybe neighbors of the river association with some legal authority that collects a little bit of money from everybody every year to do ongoing maintenance, would make it possible to make this happen and make it possible to make it a better system in the future.
You're saying once the walls are reconstructed, consider some type of association?
Or maybe now, if it's needed after that, why not do it now and then have a single body to go negotiate this entire stretch of river that's an association of the homeowners that are immediately affected by the cost.
So we would, as a town, we would not be in a position to formulate that. I mean, that would have to be established by the property owners themselves. And then the property owners, and I'm not a lawyer, the property owners would then need to convey to the township committee that this entity represents their interests. Right now, because this is the only way we can do it, is we have to deal with each property owner because the property owner retains the interest in his or her property. If there was some other mechanism created that there was some collective representation, then we would just need to know that, and then we would negotiate with that I keep knocking over this crap here. Then we would have to negotiate with that collective, but that's not something we could do. Right now, the only thing we can do is talk to each individual property owner. So anybody else on Zoom?
Yes. Moving over, Darren Sager. Welcome to public comment, Darren. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I just want to make a comment. I guess I don't comprehend anyone who bought on the block who didn't understand or didn't in some way, shape, or form get a survey to understand what they were buying when they bought there. So to say that, I'm just kind of surprised to have anyone come up to the town and basically say they didn't know. But I would have everyone go and check their surveys to see exactly what it is that they do own and make sure just, it lines up with what the town is saying that needs to be done on their property. That's the only comment I wanted to make. But I also do think that, you know, the dam is one of the biggest issues that causes back pressure and causes water to flow. If that was lower, maybe you can put another dam somewhere in the park, somewhere else to slow water process down that may, go and help people downstream, upstream, whatever it is. Look into that possible solution so that we have less issue between Jefferson and Oakland.
So just on the dam is not within our control to take away. It has to be approved by DEP. So we have to follow, and we are working on some other water projects with DEP, and they're very difficult because the modeling, as Fred said, has to show that there's no impact either upstream or downstream by the removal of the dam.
Is it
Additionally,
something
the
that
park
we possibly
itself,
can try? And again, I appreciate, I just want to say, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I understand what you're trying to do. And again, this has been going on for, more than 25 years that I've owned the property. So I know the efforts that you're trying to take here, and no one's trying to discount them.
yeah, well, I think Fred said that it's an enormous undertaking to go through the permit process. And at this point, based on preliminary evaluation, we think that there will be an impact either up or down, correct? By removing the dam. Talk in the mic, please.
Yes, we're seeing in the model there would be an increase, but we'd have to look at ways of mitigating that, like doing something in the ball field or building, like you were talking about, some other measures to contain the increase in flow so that it doesn't carry itself further downstream and impact more property. So it's a very detailed, complicated study that would have to be done to really figure out, is it achievable? Can we do something within the public lands to offset the increases by lowering or eliminating the dam? So
Is there any type of AI modeling that exists nowadays that possibly can look at this, I guess, much simpler than, I guess, putting manpower into it?
AI modeling? No, I don't think so.
Hmm?
No, not to the DEP. We have sophisticated models that we use, but I think the thing that we've got is we've got the money in the capital budget to clean that dam area, and we ought to do that, and then we can assess the impact.
I agree, without a doubt.
Okay, so that's going to
Thank you.
happen.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
I think the conversation about the dam or not dam can happen after we clean that dam and clean that area, and let's see what happens, and let's see what we pull out of there, and we can then we'll have a better sense, and we'll see how the river flows. But there's having dealt with this stuff for a while with DEP, there's absolutely no confidence in holding out that DEP is going to let us take that dam out. Additionally, the park itself is a historic park. So that could be another hurdle that we would have to address. Most likely it will be.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think that right now we're going to move forward in cleaning that area in front of the dam, and we'll assess how well that works.
I have one more hand raised. Now moving over Daniel to public comment. Welcome, Daniel. You may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thank you. I'll keep this one short. I appreciate it's going to take all of us doing this together, and I know that there's definitely some properties here that have much larger numbers than others. But just casting my eye down the line here, just so I understand, is 515 Valley, is that the business, the map building? The one that's at about $750,000?
That is correct.
I just want to check.
515 and 555.
515.
are
I
the
just
map.
Yeah,
Yes.
just wanted to check because I feel like we've probably got a lot of private individuals on this call or in the room tonight. Do we have representation from that business? Because I feel like for this to work, we'll definitely need to make sure they're comfortable with what we're moving forward with. And is there someone there that's representing that business, or there's a stakeholder in the room? Because I feel like that's a key person or a key owner or group to be involved in these discussions.
We agree with you that they're a key property owner, and we are in discussions with them. I don't know if I don't see anyone in the room representing them, and I don't know if they're on either Zoom or YouTube, but we are having conversations with them, yes.
Great. Just wanted to check because I appreciate there's some here that have a lot, big numbers in the final column, and I just cast my eye down there to make sure that we definitely had all the stakeholders that we needed. Otherwise, we could all get an agreement, but if that one person or business isn't, then it's all for naught.
Yes, when we think of 100%, we think of both sides of the river, all the residential properties, and then there's 3 commercial properties on the valley side.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the room? Anybody on Zoom?
No.
Okay, so again, this is a conversation. We're going to continue to have this discussion. We're going to go back and look, as I said, we're going to go back and look at the issue of the wall and the material we use in the wall, see if there's any, what the difference is. We'll go back and continue our conversation about, is there a way to find some other money for this? We'll take a look at the issue of, is it something that the town should entertain as far as acquiring? I don't hold that up as a real possibility, only because of the precedent. Quite honestly, the Lightning Brook, which runs from Springfield Avenue all the way down to Irvington through the Hilton neighborhood, is a much longer stretch than this stretch. And if we set a precedent here, do we have to do the same thing there? And we'll move forward with the dam cleaning. And the other thing is that we are going to, in order to make sure that we know the exact boundaries, our intent is to go out and hire someone, one firm, to do a unified survey of the whole section, so that they will go to the Hall of Records in Newark, look up each deed. They'll come out. We'll probably have to get your permission to have them do markers so that we're clear about properties. If you have your own surveys, then we can match them up against those. But quite honestly, we've seen different surveys, and they're a little unclear as to who owns what part and which side of the river. And so we feel that having one uniformed survey of all the properties would be in our interest. I think it's a discussion tool. If you come back with so the question was, will that be the official record? For us, it will be the information that we use to determine this, unless someone can come back and show us that information is wrong. Okay, everything's open to further discussion.
Yeah, and I think we also need to look at what possible monies might be available, if any, because Maplewood Memorial Park is a historic area. There might be some, but we can look into that as well.
Yeah. Anything else?
Just, I had messaged those on Zoom. If you would please share with me your name, address, and email so we can contact you going forward. If you'd send that information to my email, pwherry@maplewoodnj.gov.
If you didn't get that information is on the letter that we mailed out to everyone. It's helpful that we know who's here so that we're clear about who's missing. And then we can reach out to them. So again, thank you for coming. If you did not get a larger sheet of both the cost estimate and the map, they're up here. Make sure you signed in. And if there's any particular issue of you're not getting our information, you can see Patrick and make sure that he gets that. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to all of our town folks for presenting. And again, we'll be talking and keeping you informed as we move forward.